If a sacred cow exists in the punk world, it is the Sex Pistols. Bursting onto the scene in 1977 with Nevermind the Bollocks, the Pistols would shoot up the #1 on the charts, influencing countless groups. However, in recent years, more and more listeners, especially from the new generation, have been voicing complaints with the legendary group. Well, in this video, I'm going to go over the top 3 things that explain this reversal of fates. Number 1, music just doesn't hold up. So yeah, the Sex Pistols music actually kind of sucks. Every few years, I revisit this album, thinking that I am going to get something truly transformative out of this legendary project, and every single year, I leave disappointed. And this is an experience that has been shared by many people. It's like, oh boy, another 6-minute punk song. Oh wait, it's actually only 3 minutes, but it drags so much that it actually feels twice as long. And you can contrast this with the Ramones, who, at the time never had anything near the chart success that the Sex Pistols did, but today enjoy much better success on all fronts. And frankly, it's because they just wrote better songs. The Sex Pistols have long received a lot of leeway in their lack of musical contributions simply for the amount of influence that they have had on much better groups who have actually produced very good projects. And the Sex Pistols are in fact a place where it is the sum of the parts that is greater than the machine. Individual elements from the musical contributions are truly great. Johnny Rotten's voice is in fact probably the greatest contribution to the entire genre. I mean, it's been imitated about 40,000 times. The reason why is because it just works. But outside of this historical importance, it becomes harder and harder as the years go on to actually push people to listen to this, because most of these songs are not actually good. And if you want to hear like good punk music, you are much better listening to any of the bands that were directly influenced by this group rather than listening to the group themselves. The Sex Pistols were great because of what they said that you could do, not because of, how they actually did it. And one of the big reasons why you may not like specifically what they did is my second point. They were the biggest sellouts of all time. For creating the most DIY ethics infused genre, boy, you sure wouldn't know it. First things first, the Sex Pistols weren't formed in a garage like a normal band. They were created specifically by the manager Malcolm McLaren, who saw some teenagers that were hanging around his shop and, put them together into this backing band and found this guy with a I Hate Pink Floyd t-shirt and some rotten teeth and christened him Johnny Rotten.
They just told me about the fact that they had a rock and roll band. I decided to help them. It was a kind of a moment of madness. Steve Jones.
Okay.
And Paul Cook.
All right. Now, how did Johnny Rotten and Sid Vicious come into the whole thing?
Well, they were guys that I seemed to choose in a way when I stood in the store, desperately looking for 2 other people to help these 2 guys that couldn't play manifest a group.
And do you want to know what other band can trace their origins in much of the same way? One Direction.
Let's do an imaginary boy if you want to start one, instead of just saying no.
Exactly.
Yes.
I love this guy.
Yes.
It really is just like this boy band formation. And instead of having to look good and sing well, it's like actually you need to look terrible, sing badly, and then spit on people whenever they complain about it.
It wasn't long after that we discovered that he had the worst teeth I'd ever seen.
What kind of qualifications are...
Almost... Well,
you're a good thief, you have bad teeth, this is terrific.
Also, it's been suggested it may have been frankly even more commercial than that, because the name Sex Pistols likely may have just been very subliminal advertising for Malcolm McLaren's store, creatively called Sex. But what is not up for debate is that McLaren created the Sex Pistols solely for the reason of causing controversy. As you may have seen in my previous video on the New York Dolls, he managed the group for a short period of time, found the best elements from that, created the Sex Pistols, and then just cranked all of the prickly bits up to 11. He intentionally booked them in these redneck bars and conservative talk shows just to get these, riot level apexes of controversy. And the band themselves knew very well that they were just being treated as the punk rock monkeys. They were just being shipped around from place to place to create headlines. They knew that they were just being used for their looks. And whenever things start to die down, hey, let's just get an even worse and more controversial person in the band. So Glenn Matlock was the bass player and likely the best single musician out of the entire group. He had the best understanding for melodies, and he was the primary melody songwriter, at least, for the group. However, there were some personality issues, and they famously kicked him out because he liked the Beatles. Unfortunately, the Beatles can write songs, and you can't, so that may have been not the best, tactical decision. And after this point, they had no musical momentum, especially after the person that they hired to replace them literally actually couldn't play the bass.
It was the end of the Sex Pistols as a proper rock and roll band. By the kids, for the kids, whatever that means. And it was the beginning of the Sex Pistols, as was said in it, as the Sex Pistols as a cartoon strip kind of band, playing right into Malcolm's hand.
At the end of the day, Sid couldn't play. Steve had to play louder, and he already played very loud to cover up for it.
Sid didn't have to do a lot, really, just kind of get it together to pretend to play the bass. And he couldn't even really get that together.
It was so manufactured and manipulated that Johnny Rotten would later call McLaren the most evil person on earth. And that's actually really saying something, considering just how bad of people the Sex Pistols actually were. So yeah, the Sex Pistols were terrible musicians, but they found a way to be even worse people. So Gen Z has been typified as being much more sensitive about their artists and holding them to a more higher, moral standards than previous generations, at least on the surface level. But even by the standards of the day, the Sex Pistols were just terrorists. Just to come out swinging, their very liberal use of swastikas was, it's just not cool, actually. And I don't care that, Malcolm McLaren, who is Jewish, pushed them to do it. It doesn't make it cool. I mean, there's no way that you can actually spin this. And now to just, kind of dig a little bit under the surface into the character of Sid Vicious. For what is probably the most famous member of the group, Sid actually didn't really do anything. That is, do anything besides be a terrible person. He wasn't on the album, he didn't write any songs, he was not particularly smart, something that is mentioned by every single person who talks about him.
Well, he wasn't the brightest spark on the planet, Sid.
He didn't dislike the bloke, I just thought he was a likeable twit, really.
Sid came in, and Sid was a moron, he was an idiot.
And in fact, it seems like he was just kind of used by the group as this punk rock mascot. There's this quote of, "Sid was offered up as a sacrificial lamb by the people around the Pistols. None of them would have gone over the top. He was their kamikaze pilot, and they were all too happy to strap him in and send him off." And if you're in a situation where you just need a guy to, cause controversy and get headlines, boy, have we got your guy for you. Here's a short little list of some incidents. Caused a riot in Norway, physically attacked numerous journalists with bike chains or broken bottles, hurled a glass that shattered and blinded the girl in one eye, constantly spitting on fans or hitting them over the top of the head with his bass, and possibly killed his girlfriend. And while this is going on, he's just hopelessly addicted to heroin. But hey, he's got that award-winning smile, am I right? Now, I actually am going to give some credit to Johnny Rotten, because over the years, he has seemed to consistently express regret over introducing Sid to this circumstance in which he would just, die.
And I felt really guilty about bringing him into the Pistols, because he was ill-equipped mentally to deal with the pressures, and he was prone to fall into the drug culture very quickly because his mother was a registered heroin addict.
It's a situation that Sid Vicious, if he had not been in the band, almost certainly would not have, ended up in the way that he did. He was a person that was especially susceptible to all of the bad elements of that scene and just didn't have any kind of natural defenses to guard himself from it. And this led directly to his death. So yeah, there's actually just a body count for the band. So I don't think it would be that controversial to say that the group isn't exactly full of the greatest role models. And you can imagine this being just further amplified by the fact that you just have so many more bands that are just, so much better in terms of music and just greater cultural impact without all of the baggage that the Sex Pistols come with. And today, the living members of the Sex Pistols seemingly just view the band as like a name brand that they use to, drag out of the closet every few years to get some money whenever they're running low. And we're not even going to begin to get in on Johnny Rotten's, political contrarianism, we'll say, but it all just kind of stirs together to get a situation where people are likely just going to become less and less interested in the band themselves, and more just so with the bands that they directly influence. But if you too want to go out in a blaze of glory, watch this video.